My name is Jakob Gottlieb Svendsen. I'm going to talk about how I make task extensions, or to be more precise, maybe how my team makes this. I do it myself also, but I am a chief, it doesn't say there, I'm the chief cloud engineer in Saxo Bank, which means I have a team of 10 people to do these things. And I do it myself. I mostly do prototypes and ideas, and then I have my guys or girls do it properly. I make some crappy code. It says, here it's the logic, and then they go, okay, we're going to fix it for you. That's kind of what I do. Anybody was here on my session yesterday? Yes. So I didn't scare you completely away. That's good. Because yesterday I showed about how I was using a task, how I used it in Saxo Bank. But this session is about how I made the task, how we make the task, and how. Has anybody ever made one of these tasks before? All right. Was it easy? No? All right. Oh, sponsors. I love the sponsors, otherwise we wouldn't be here. That's great. Yes, as I say, I'm the technical product owner of what's called Cloud Foundation in Saxo Bank, which you could also say was the Cloud Center of Excellence. I'm Microsoft MVP for 9 times. Hopefully 10 times next week when it's the 1st of July. Hopefully 10. Yeah, that would be nice. And I don't want to spend too much time here, but the last one, my blog is jakobsvendsen.com, where I put stuff that I couldn't find on Google that I had to make myself, and then hopefully other people can read it. Yeah, so actually, I'm not going to use much slides today. I'm also going to apologize that I used too many slides yesterday. But I'm going to talk about how to make the task, what is the marketplace, develop, build, test, package, and release. A little bit about life cycle, versioning, and all that. Yeah. Saxo Bank, we are a fintech company, which means we are providing APIs for other banks, and we are providing trader apps for the machine. So if anybody wants to start a bank, no? If you do, call us, because we can help you with the back end, and then you just have to make a beautiful front end. But that's what we do. So we have been doing APIs for banks for 20 years, or 30 years almost. So that means that we have a lot of freaking old stuff. It's like almost like Exit Directory, right? We come from the basement. But we have this new reference architecture, as you see here, where we are going to use Kubernetes, Kafka, and Elasticsearch for. We do that for some apps, and most apps are going to be migrated into that. But we do have requirements sometimes. That means if you have over 2 milliseconds, response, then it's too much. And you go like, okay, then we can't do it in cloud. And also we are using multicast a lot, which is not supported in Azure. So we have lots of things on-prem still. And we have lots of things in the cloud. But we are using mostly Kubernetes service, but we are also using VMs, dynamic test environments as we call them, where you can have a copy of the whole Saxo API. I think we have around, I don't know actually, maybe 15 APIs internally that the different apps for the customers use. And you can then have a complete copy of that. And that means we have around 1,000 to 2,000 VMs, and they are all redeployed every week. So that means that it doesn't always work perfectly, right? When you deploy 2,000 VMs, some things must go wrong in one of them. Because it's Windows. No, just kidding. How many here have used Azure DevOps? Yes. Here we're going to use the online version. Actually, in Saxo Bank, we mostly use the on-prem version. And you'll be like, why do we do that? Yeah, well, because a few of the projects are not allowed to be put into the cloud. Even the source code is not allowed to be put in the cloud. And why is that? Mostly because of partners that says that it's not allowed. So we just do it usually on-prem. But there are these agents that execute whatever we run in Azure DevOps. We have a pipeline, we run it, and it's either we're going to run it as self-hosted, which means your own machines, and that is usually what we do in the bank. Then you can put a machine in your own network and in your own domain, and then it executes your code from some certain context. If you don't want to do it yourself, then you can do the Azure hosted ones. But be aware what's actually available in the images, because as you can see there, I put a Windows and a Ubuntu, and the Windows one has PowerShell 7.2.1 and also other versions. And in Azure 7.1.0, but it does have PowerShell, Azure, and Azure RM. If you were to take a Linux image, which you actually usually do because it's quicker, there'll be another version of PowerShell, and it will not have the Azure PowerShell installed. It will only have the Azure CLI. So it's important when you do a task that you make sure that the machines running your task has the requirements that your task needs, right? Pretty obvious. So watch out what it has, and I have links here in more info, and of course you can get the slides from the GitHub, and you can see, because what's cool about these things is that they have these GitHub repositories where, let's try and open it, if the internet works, yeah, where you see here, this is one of the images, and it actually explains very detailed what's on it. You see, all this crap. It's the most bloated thing ever. But of course somebody needs R or Pulumi or whatever. But that's why you can exactly see what's there, and it's important, very important, if you are doing tasks, that you make sure that everywhere it's going to run, that it has the requirements that you need, of course. Yeah. But what we are going to do today is make a pipeline task. Oh, the count is not waiting. How many here are still using the graphic release pipelines? And how many here are completely moved to YAML? Yeah, we have not completely moved to YAML. But it's not really matters for this, because making a task for graphic, the old school release pipelines or YAML is the same. There's a few differences, and I'm going to talk about those. You'll see that. Yeah, but we're going to make a custom pipeline task. And this is what I'm going to do. 1 second. Yeah. Yeah. And that's just to show that what is a task, right? A task is when you put in here, in your pipeline, you put in a task in your stage. And I'm on the Wi-Fi, so please nobody do some torrent or whatever you are doing. Here's it. This is the task we're going to make. It's called sample. And that's because it's the test version. I'm going to show you why we do it like that. This is not the production version. This is the dev version. That's why it's called a pretty crappy name. But we're going to make one of these tasks, and we can run it in a pipeline, and we can make it actually. In this case, what I showed yesterday was that this inline script, Azure thing, would fail because the connection selected here had invalid credentials. This task validates whatever it is, and we have selected the same connection, and it enables the connection. And then we can run whatever PowerShell against Azure. So that's what I showed yesterday about how the logic of this task works. But now I'm going to focus on how we actually build it, and talk about not so much about the actual business logic, as I usually called it, but more about the actual framework and how you do it. And actually, I realized I forgot one thing. To log into VPN. And then you need MFA, right? Because I'm going to show one pipeline in the production. Hopefully, no. Then hopefully the security department doesn't get angry. Otherwise, we'll have a good talk about that. Yeah. So there was just introduction to the task, right? But what we're going to do is make a pipeline task, and we're going to use a custom service connection. So as I showed right before, we have the Azure service connection, but you can make your own. And this is what we're going to do against an Azure function that I made. Oh, that's nice animation. This is just a few links, and again, get the slides from the repo. I'll put it there later today. But what we have when you want to start is that you have, of course, a Microsoft Docs that kind of tells you the hello world example, but this is great, you see. This is all the tasks. If you go to this repo called Azure Pipeline Task, and you go to Tasks, you'll see that all of the tasks that's built into to DevOps is there. Nice, right? So you took the Azure PowerShell one. If you want to make a modified version, I showed a modified version of this one yesterday in my session. And actually when I joined the company 1.5 years ago, we were using a custom task built on this version, and there were some things that were missing, and then I was like, oh shit, we need to update, there are so many things to update, but then I realized, oh shit, we can just take this version 5, take the few lines we changed into that, and then use that. And it took me about 1 hour to do that, and because it's all here, you see. It's all here. And what you have when you make a task is that you have a script or one or more scripts, and you have this task JSON file here that explains what to execute and how it looks and all the metadata and inputs and GUI and all that. This is what I'm going to show in just a second. And then you can put whatever you need into this folder with the tasks and deploy it, and then you have whatever you need. I mean, you can put executables, whatever, any kind of references you would need, any kind of DLLs, put it in same folder as the task. And well, you can do it other ways too, but that's at least easy. Besides that, we have I have a link to this is the one I showed, but there's also like an SDK description here that talks about how you would, 1 second, this one, the VSTS task SDK is one I use in the task because this is has some functions that can read the GUI, can read the input, the selection, whatever a user was doing, all these things about, instead of writing it myself, right, all the callbacks to Azure DevOps is right here in this module. But let's get on with it. I'll show it later. First, to deploy a task, you will make an extension and put the task in that extension, right? So if I again open here, you see that this extension is called sample tasks. Is the one we're doing. And as you can see, it's not only yesterday I went to bed late because the last one has been actually installed 3 a.m. Sunday morning. So it was a good preparation, a little session there. But when you look at the extension, what you do is you describe what's there, of course. You describe different things. But I think instead of doing that, I'm just going to go to the demo. But there is an extension manifest reference that you can use. And here it does talk about, that's way too small for you to see. Here it talks about the different things in the file, right? It explains each of the fields. But if we go to my example, I'm going to release that later on GitHub. I just realized that maybe I shouldn't call it Saxo Bank, but I'm just going to update that, and then I'm going to release it. But if we look at the VSS extension JSON file, this is what explains, that describes the actual extension that we have. And it explains stuff like, you see, an ID, which is a kind of schema name, as I usually call it, display name, version, so on and so forth. Version is important because when you import stuff in Azure DevOps, you cannot import an older version that's already there. So when you screw up, when you release something and all the company goes, hey, that doesn't work, we did that about 3 times this year, I think, then we have to roll back. Then you can't release the old version. You have to build a new version, or at least change the version number to a newer one, or you could delete the extension You could delete the extension as I showed in the extension here. That's one way to do it, right? Uninstall. But we don't do anything manually. So our pipeline, as I will show, will simply install a new version. So what we do when we screw up is that we build a new version and then we deploy it. Yeah, let's go on. That's not so excited with the actual extension. So when we do tasks, as I say, there was different documentation, but actually I think I'm done with the slides now. Yeah, demo. Yeah, okay, there's a few ones later, but mostly demos. Let's look at the code. If we look at the actual structure of my repo here, which of course you can also have very soon, I'm going to upload it to my own GitHub, and then you can get it, and then I'm going to link to it from a README file in the PSconf repo. But when you look at it, what I have here is two things. I have a SRC folder which has the extension and a function, and the function is what I showed yesterday. The function is what we call from the task. So our goal right now is to call this function. That is what we want to do from our task. But this function is authenticated with Azure AD. In authentication, I've set it up to Azure AD, as you can see right there. So we need a task that can select a custom service connection and call this function. And this function is, of course, also PowerShell. Because what I did was, while I was doing those slides on Saturday, turning into Sunday, I was like, I can't share the code. I can't share the code that we have. So what do I give the people? Do they want to view slides or do they want to view code? So I recoded one of our APIs into a Azure function PowerShell. We are using Azure Functions. We have done that, and it's been running since 2018, and I don't know how many executions a day, maybe 1,000, and we have never had any issues. I mean, except the ones we screw up ourselves, but we don't really have any problems when it's running Azure and Azure Function in app services. That's one thing that doesn't break, at least yet, but now I just jinxed it, so it's probably my phone is going to call in 2 minutes and say, hey, everything is broken down. But to be honest, it's working really well. But it's a C# function we make because we have lots of executions and because it's quite old. So I kind of remade it into PowerShell here so that I can share it with you. And what it does, I showed it yesterday, is that we are going to call this function with the task, and it's going to create a new resource group. And it's also going to create a temporary 10-minute, a 10-minute access, a 10-minute credential, what's called app registration secret. And we're going to return that back to the pipeline, which is here. We don't actually... We're going to return it back to the pipeline here. And then inside our beautiful task, we are going to, again, this is not really the important part. That's why I might be going a bit quick, because who cares what it does? That's not the important thing right now. I just want to give you a little example, a context here. But we call it here. We call the Azure function here. We get a response, which is including this new credential. And then we use a little trick down here. Well, what we do is we set up a connection. We actually try to connect to Azure using the new credential, because it will not work, instantly. It takes between, 1 minute and 5 minutes. So what we do is to retry and see if it can connect. And when we know it can connect and it's good, then we can actually use a little special trick here, right host. With the right host, and output this very special thing that says set endpoint, which means that this Azure connection, it didn't work before, but and then we can generate this 10-minute credential, and then we can output these 2 lines, and then it actually enables the connection for 10 minutes. Because what we do on the connection is to set the ID and the key for the connection, or you could turn it into, you could say username and password. We update the credential and it works. So this means that anybody in our company can actually make a pipeline here. Select a service connection because we have automated enabling those in all projects. Select the service connection, make a resource group, input this very important field right here that tells you who owns it. And we're going to check and validate that. I'm not going to show that here, I showed that yesterday. But we're going to validate that and make sure they have the cost center references and all they need to be allowed. I usually do an analog saying, we just need your credit card information because you cannot just deploy anything. You need to deploy, and they're like, but it's dev, why do I need to have a business service for dev or whatever? You need to because you need a credit card. You need somebody who can pay for what you're running. But to be honest, we don't really do internal invoicing. So it's mostly, of course, to control if something went completely ballistic and uses $1 million, then we do that. But I think most of the time it works pretty well. people are not excessively using Azure, except myself. I've done a few mistakes, which cost around, I don't know, $500,000 Danish or something like that. No, actually we stopped it. I made a bit of tell it. It was actually an automation runbook that was supposed to enable something called DDoS protection, and it didn't work when I joined the company, and I had one of my guys fix it, and it was enabled, and it enabled a DDoS protection standard for everything. But somebody back in the day had thought, let's make one for each of the resource groups. It's like 20,000. It's like, yeah, what's that in euros? It's 2,500 euros a month per instance, right? So not per resource group, but we made. So when it executed, somebody came to me 2 days later and said, hey, my cost has gone up 3,000%. Okay, that's not good. So we looked at it and we have created like, I don't know, 40 or something of these, right? At 2,500 euros each. And I looked at the documentation and it said, you just need one because it can cover everything. And then I was like, shit, why didn't they check that when they made the runbook, when they made the automation? Because I was just expecting it was put in production, it didn't work, we fix it, and everything is great, but it wasn't. And luckily, I only spent around 10,000 euros. So I told the CTO, well, I'll give the beer this Friday then. But I only did that because we have free draft beer in the office. And we are joking. I mean, 10,000 euros is a lot, but it's not a lot when you compare that we are using 2 million euros a month in Azure. So therefore, something like that, which means that shit happens. But let's look at the actual task. How do we build it? When you have one of these tasks, you have the extension JSON as I showed before. The extension JSON explains your extension that contains X number of tasks. But it also explains other things that are general for your for your extension. So for example, if I want to make a custom service connection, it's also here. But I'll show that in a second. Let's first look at the actual task file. 1 second. So the task.json, so let me see if I can zoom out a bit because it's a bit difficult to see the actual structure of the folders. If we look at the extension folder here, where my whole task is, inside here I have a folder called sample task, Saxobank sample task and Saxobank sample task multi. This is the one we're going to use, sample task. So for each task you want to make, you make one of these folders. You put in there a task JSON file that explains what it's called, sample task, and links. One thing, this is important, right? Links to help. Because who wants to do support all day? I can easily see a difference. If we put a good page there, we also return, wiki pages in errors, and that makes my team more happy. Because they will not be, privately message all day. Even if we have what's called a channel in Teams, and this is where we want people to write. People still write to my team directly, hello, and wait for them to say hello, and then they, yeah. Anybody seen the no hello thing? Yeah, no hello. Write to somebody, say, hello, this is my problem, and then we can answer asynchronously. We do not, I can, every time I'm in about 5 to 10 meetings a day, and every time I get out of the meeting, there will be 5 people who have written hello to me sometimes. It's like, God. So I started to make a message in Teams that said, no hello. And I'm actually considering making a bot that runs on my machine that can answer people in the first, because, when it's the human nature, right? You ask somebody for help in a channel, somebody helps you, and the next time you need more, then you write to that person directly. But it has problems, right? Because that person is probably busy and nobody else can help. And for me as a lead, it means, hey, we have this long private chat. Can you join a 20-minute call? And I can explain you what we chat about. And then you can say what's the result, what the solution is. Why didn't you just do it in the channel so I could read the actual thing? And then I could just write one line. So that's not really the point of the session here. But what you see here is you have the task JSON. And the task JSON explains the name of the task and all this help stuff, the version. It also explains inputs. I'm going to get back to that in just a second, which is like the GUI. But what's really important is in the bottom here, we have something called execution. PowerShell 3. Yeah, I don't know why it's called PowerShell 3. It's probably PowerShell version 3. It was. But yeah, doesn't really matter. It works pretty well. It runs the version of PowerShell that you have on the machine. But as you see here, target, it says run this PowerShell script. So this means that the inputs are coming from the inputs here is the GUI, and people configure that, and then they actually execute this script. And the script we have right here, sample task. Does it have any inputs? No, it doesn't. Is anybody here using strict mode usually? Yeah, we don't use it with off. We use it with version latest. But I was a bit tired on 3 a.m. Sunday night, and then I just shut it off. But you see, there are different things here. You have to take care of whatever. But it doesn't mean, it's not important, these things about whatever we have here. It's important that it's just a normal PowerShell script, right? And any kind of output you do here will come into the pipeline. Which means that you can output a proper error message and all these things, but you can also run these things as I showed before to set different things in the pipeline, to forward things and so on, so forth. But let's back to the slide for one here, because I have task JSON inputs where we are now. In the inputs, and this is probably the last slide or a few last slides, is we simply define a name of the input, and then we can select different types. So like string, pick list, which is like a drop-down list. But also you see connected service, SB sample endpoint. Well, that is my service connection. And I'll show you that in a second. Let me just check. No more important slides, good. Because if we look at the task JSON, you'll see that in the task JSON, you have inputs, as I said before. And you can make different types, like a string. And a string will show as a text box, of course. One second. Here. String. Resource group name. This one, right? It's a text box. But if we select... No, we don't want to do Spotify right now. If we write instead our connected service Azure RM, this is a built-in service connection, therefore it's going to show drop-down with the service connection for Azure Dev. But if I go into my extension file and I define my own type of service connection, which is here, Yeah, this is right here. SP, Saxo Bank, sample, endpoint. This is my own type of service connection, which means that I can go into my project and actually create a service connection where I define the fields. You see in here in the JSON here in the extension, I can actually, in the authentication schemes, I can actually define inputs also. I want a text box, I want different things. So if we look at my service connection, one second, is service connection here. You'll see that if I say new service connection, we have all the built-in ones, but then we also have this one. Saxo Bank sample service endpoint. It means I can make, and if we select that, you'll see that my GUI pops up here, and I can then, Chrome, don't save that. But I can then put in information, save a service connection, and use that. And this is because this one had the Azure AD authentication enabled, so we're using Azure AD authentication in our task. So we have, in our case, service connections for our API, which is open for everyone, and then we don't have any access to Azure, but the service connection is actually enabling that. This is what I showed yesterday, so look at the recording if you didn't see the session. The extension then, we then go into task.json for that task. We make a folder for each of the tasks. In the folder, there's the task.json, as I talked about before here. And in that, we do the actual GUI here. So you see, connected service Azure RM is the built-in one, but connected service SP sample endpoint is then showing a drop-down, which is the drop-down that is right here, which is showing our custom service connections. So that's great. So we can enable people to call our API, but not call Azure directly before our API enables it. Here we can do different things, and what's interesting about this is that it's not really documented. There is a schema, which means that if I kind of do this, it shows what I can do. But note that I have group name here, options, validation, and visible rule. But if I go a bit higher here, I have the same. But it's actually not true, because it has to be in the right order. So you have to look at examples. Look at those built-in ones that I showed before, because you can just steal the code from Microsoft, which is the best thing you can do, and look at it. So there are even things in the schema. So if I look at this documentation here, I have links for it, which was here. I have a schema here. In the schema, I can see what I can write in my file. And that was great. Except we were missing regex validation. It was like, can't you read? Is it really true that you can't do regex validation on the text box? No, it was not true, because looking at the actual out-of-the-box things, there were things that doesn't exist in the schema that is actually used. So if we look at what we have here is that if I scroll down a bit, I have this validation thing right here. And this is not documented anywhere. But if you look at the actual Azure DevOps tasks, then you'll see that it's been used all over the place. And it's really nice. So what I'm saying is this is something that is partially documented, but there are things you can do. What's interesting is, you see, I put this one task, this input, I put Snow ID into the group name called GUI options. And I put the group up here somewhere, here, groups, and it says, is expanded true. So if we look at my GUI here, there, you will see that I have a GUI options, and it is expanded, I can close it. But note, if I select a specific setting here, another input pops up, right? Because this Snow ID, I've also set, where is it? There it is. Visible rule, right? Target type equals generate. So I can actually set visible rules and make GUI pop up when somebody selects something. So target type generate, if we look at target type, it's an input right here, and it's a radio, which is a radio button, as you saw before, and there are 5 options, and one of them is called generate. So when this option is selected, it will show. You see, so now it's gone, 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 and then it's there. But this also has the validation, so I would have to write something like this for it to be happy. But it's not a mandatory field, so it will allow me to, even with a invalid thing, it will allow me to save. Yeah, no, it won't. But we don't have to fill it because it's not an actual required field. Okay, so what we then do is you need to deploy it. And what you do is you're gonna make an extension file, and then you're gonna put that into Azure. So what we do is to make a build script that can actually go and make sure that it copies the correct things. It sets the build number here, as you see. But as you also see here, it's going to take the build in DevOps and use that as build number so that we always have a new version every time we build. It's going to copy files from different folders into one folder. It's going to copy the VSTS tasks SDK, which is the one used. Well, I actually forgot to show that. My task here is using a module, because Tobias says I have to, and it's fine. But in this module, we have a few functions, and one of them is called get task input, which reads all the inputs and sets it into a variable. But you see here, we're doing get VST input and then the name, or get VST endpoint, which then gets the service connection, which you can then set in a variable called task input, which we always have available. So this module is required for any kind of task you make, and this is why when we do the build, we copy that one into the correct folders to each of the tasks. Then the interesting part comes, and I'm almost done actually with time, but we have this thing called build test edition, because our task is available for everyone. We can, of course, test the task local in our own organization or whatever, separate dev TFS, but we also want to test it in production. So what we do is to actually build the test edition, where rather than just releasing each of them, we're actually going to replace the names so that it's not called whatever task is named, but it's called this CC something. So if we go into Saxo Bank environment, we do set, you'll see that here it's only one, but you have around 10 in the production. So you can actually make a pipeline with a dev version. So if a user has an issue, we can fix it. We can release a dev version from our branch. We can ask the user to try it in his pipeline, and he says, yes, it works. Or she said, yes, it works. And then we can release it. We also, in the pipeline, this is why I opened the VPN, but I don't think I want to open the actual pipeline. But what we do is, in the pipeline, we release the test version, and then we have a stage that runs all the test tasks in different configurations. And if that stage goes well, then we're going to approve the production. So it's really nice that you can actually, it's a good idea, I think, that my team had before I joined the company, is that we make this task JSON file that describes all the things. But then we make a task test JSON file that kind of overrides some of the fields, so that the name becomes ZZ sample instead of whatever name it had before, sample task. This means that we can release the test version. We see if I go to build test, I can run my build script, but I can send the build test edition true, and that then of course goes into the script and build test edition right here. And it's going to take that JSON file and it's going to merge it with the other one. So it's going to override some of the fields, then it's going to make a new JSON file, and then we can release that. So I think to be honest, this is really useful for us, because we can test in production. We can even run it a week in production like that, and somebody can test something, we can make sure it works, and then we can release the actual production version. So that's very important. When we have built it, and actually you don't need a build script. Let's see, where is all you need is to run this one called tfx.cmd, which came from the sample, which built this VSIX file. And then you can go here to the organizational settings of your organization here, and you can select, go back there, organizational settings, and you can select extensions. And here's the extensions installed in this one. We can browse the marketplace, and then we can publish extensions here, and I could just click new extension, Azure DevOps, and I could then say, okay, I just drag and drop that file here. You see, it's very small, but it says via IX file format here. That's one way to do it, but we don't do anything manually in my company. So what we do here instead is, of course, to maybe fix the file a bit here, and then we actually use this tfx command to generate the file, and then we of course has a release script. So if I look at my little scripts here, you'll see that the build and publish demo, what I do here is we set a build number, because as I said, it's using an environment variable, and this is something that is really nice when you run it in DevOps, but it's also quite nice when you do debugging and local development, because you can just set the environment variable and then run the script. So we set the version, we build it, build test edition, but then we also deploy it with another script, which I'll show you here. Deploy, private. This is one file that's been, yeah, it's the one that I don't want to put into our repo, because it has this one. Take a picture. Yes, I know it's recorded. I'm going to delete it right after this session. Don't trust me. That's why I'm showing it. But what we do is we read the files, and then we use the VS Team module. Has anybody used the VS Team module before? It's a really nice module. And we can then install the extension or update the extension, whether if it's there or not.
But does it work also on Azure DevOps Online?
Yes. Everything I show here is what I show here is actually in the good point. What he said was, does it work online? Yes, it does. And this is actually the online version I'm showing now. But we are using the on-prem server, which has old crappy API versions compared to this. But all these things I show here it has been standard for, I don't know, 5 years at least. So there's no problem there. It's the same. I am using there. Why are we using on-prem? As I said, some source code are not allowed to get into the cloud, mostly because the partners, which are other banks, have some requirements.
I have another question. So, how does it work? You publish the extension to the marketplace?
Yeah.
And then you use the command-based extension?
Yeah. What I do is publish with the update extension. It's publishing to the marketplace, so it will be here. And then I go and say, where is it? This is the installed extensions are in the organization, and we go marketplace. Then you have to go from your actual project, you go and get it free, and you're like, yes, I can get my own stuff free. That's amazing. I don't charge myself. And then it installs into the project. We have not automated that part because it's a one-time thing. You just add it once, and then whenever you update the thing, it's gonna actually update on each of the projects. So that's one thing I realized when I was prepping this demo. One thing I even didn't think existed, because I've never done it, because it's just a one-time thing. But yeah, that's how you install it. Yeah, and then when we go through our code and all that, what we do, and of course I don't have time. I have 30 seconds left, but I don't have time to really go into the deep ends of the code here. But what you will see is that we use this get endpoint thing, which is get VSTS endpoint. And here you simply get all the fields that you set in your service connection, like a secret and all that. And this means that we can use that in our code, which is here. There's a get API access token function that we made ourselves in that module I showed before. So we can provide all the inputs, and it simply does an authentication against Azure. And I updated to version 2 for this demo. But that's how we do it, right? So you can put any kind of file you would like in here, and you can then release it. But I would really stress that this thing about releasing a test version in production is so really useful. And what if we learn? I have this slide about lessons learned, I think. Otherwise, I'll just tell you. But yeah, I'll just do one slide and then we're done, almost done. But releasing the test version is really nice because we can run it. But one thing I can just blame my company because it was done before I joined, is that we put all the functions in one extension, right? So every time that we actually update something, it updates everything. So that's lesson learned. Don't put it in a big extension. If you have one extension, one repo, people are going to say, hey, we need a new task now. Let's put it in the same. It's so easy. Yeah, but then we screw up everything every time we screw up. But it's easier to put in multiple extensions. Another thing I would like to stress before I close here is that return proper error messages. And one thing I was actually planning to show you is that my little function is in Apple. I call it amplification of error messages, which means that it just says something went wrong, try again later, right? This is our favorite error message. But you should add something about the actual error. And you should also add a link for them to get help, like include a link to a guide. This is really pulled down, the support from my team, like I don't know how much, a lot, and everybody's so happy. So put links, make people be able to see what's wrong, output a useful error message. And what I do in this function is to output, bad request. Because if you do an OK or an internal server error, well, an OK, you can send back a body. But if you do an internal server error, if you, for example, if you were just crashing the thing with a normal error, the user would just see error 500 and no error message. So what we do is that every time there is an error, we're going to return a bad request. Because in a bad request error, you can actually send back a message. So the task you have here in its... Oh, sorry. You were taking pictures. Sorry, I have very less time, but you can take this code from a repo. Well, but if you want to take a picture, please do here. So you see the output binding is how you output from Azure Functions. And we do this, something went wrong. Please try again later. I would never write that. That sucks, to be honest. You really want to show proper error messages. And you actually want to end it with not an error. Because if you end it with an error, even though you outputted this, it's going to output internal server 500 to the user, right? So one downside of this method, and I'll be super happy if anybody has an improvement to it. One downside is that we do not finish with an error, which means that when you look at the actual functions in Azure, you'll see that all of them were successful, which is not exactly perfect, right? But it's still better than the user not getting an error message. Now there's another problem with the user not reading the error message. That's a more difficult task. But that's a problem, right? But if you look at monitor, you'll actually see that it's going to show that all are successful, but you also have result code here. So you can see that some of them are 200, 200. That's good. And then 500, and we have a few 400 too somewhere. Yeah. And then in the task, what we do is to read the actual reply. Yeah. And that's about it, I think. So what I was saying is I'm going to share this example on my GitHub and link to it so you can read it. And you're very welcome to contact me on here. I'll only be here today, as I said, but also on Twitter, Jakob G. Svendsen, or whatever place you can find me. I really recommend making these tasks because it gives you a way to execute things in a context that everybody understands, because at least if they're using pipelines, and you can have very easy different kind of authentication, these service connections that I showed. It's super easy to have a really nice place to execute PowerShell for people. So I can recommend that. And now we have minus 20 minutes for questions, so you just come and ask me if you have any questions. Yeah, but thank you for coming. I hope it was inspiring at least, and I hope that you will do some task for DevOps.